Welcome to the For the Gospel podcast, where we provide sound doctrine for everyday people. I'm your host, Costi Hinn, and I want to welcome our listeners on Apple and Spotify, and those of you enjoying this on our YouTube video podcast format, and those of you who download For the Gospel episodes around the world, welcome, and we're excited to jump in. This is episode 4 of our gospel series. We have looked at what the gospel is, very important, what the gospel is not, and then last episode, a great sit down with Pastor Conrad Mbewe to get an interesting and unique vantage point from him and his ministry in Africa, and also really around the world. He ministers a lot in America, and the devastating effects of the prosperity gospel and what happens when people are sucked in to a false system of belief. Well, now we got to get practical. You need to know the gospel. That's important. You need to know what the gospel is not. It's good also to have other people's perspective and to get a little bit of broader insight like Pastor Conrad provided. And now, how in the world do you share the gospel? I want to weave in both tips and wise counsel for creating opportunities to share the gospel, and also the nuts and bolts, or what I would just call the essentials of sharing the gospel, knowing already that if you want to know what message you should be sharing, then episode 1 will do that. And if you've been with us on this series, you're good to go. But now for the practical side of things, how do we do this? Each principle I give you will cover some aspect of what's important, how to create opportunities, and what that all looks like. So let's jump in. Number 1, know the gospel and practice it. Know the gospel and practice it. I already said episode 1 will take you into what the gospel is. I outline it, bullet point it, cover various aspects, give you a go-to passage. So the message of the gospel should be clear to you, and that's where you start. You've got to know the gospel, and then in order to share it in some form without neglecting the core elements, I'm a big proponent of practicing this. Now, it's not just to be scripted and to come off insincere and not inauthentic. You know, you're like just a broken record where you rattle off your things and you go here, boom, okay, and how will you respond? Repent and believe. There's got to be a sincerity in your heart. But if we don't communicate these things or practice articulating them, we're not going to be versed on sharing the gospel. You've got to understand who God is as a holy creator and what he thinks about sin, and then be able to convey that to people. And I'm not a big fan of dumbing it down to the degree where the gospel gets muddied, but I would say using everyday language is a great thing. I was sitting down with a brother recently who kept referring to sin as treason. And when I asked him, why are you using that concept? He said, well, I'm military background, law enforcement. The idea of treason is immediately understandable and relevant to the people that I talk to. And I thought that's such a great everyday use of language for him. For somebody else, you might say making mistakes, messing things up. Why? Because sin is defined as missing the mark. You miss the mark of God's standard, and what does that result in? A mess of things. This world is broken. It needs to be fixed. Things are out of order. All of these things communicate, here's the target, here's where we're hitting, we're missing the mark. That is the doctrine of sin. And so using everyday language is going to be a lot easier when you know the gospel, and now you're going to, like a human thesaurus, use words that communicate the exact same things. Bible words are great. I mean, when God uses the word sin, that means that it's a great word to use. Sometimes that just means you need to define it, and even that can be done with everyday language. Is when you say, we all sin. And, maybe you've heard that word a lot. Sin is really simple. It's a churchy word maybe to some people, or sounds preachy, but all I'm trying to tell you is it's missing the mark. That's what it means. And you miss the mark, I miss the mark. What is that mark? The mark is God's standard. And, we're not perfect. We never will be. But sin is serious. Missing God's standard is a huge deal. All of that was biblical, what I just said to you, but in everyday language. You've got to know how people should respond in order to be saved as well. So knowing the gospel and practicing it means practicing what you would say if somebody said, okay, so what should I do? At that moment, I think a lot of people are like the old joke, like what do you do when you get what you want? You're like, I don't know. It's kind of anticlimactic. I've been leading up to this thing and I've wanted it for so long and now I have it. I don't know what to do with it. You have somebody in front of you who says, everything you're saying is so true. What do I do? Pray this prayer, or just repent, like just believe, man, or just come to church. Like, so there's something in there that's true. Should you pray? Yeah. Do you want to lead them in a recited prayer and then say, okay, cool, welcome to the kingdom? Like if you say those words, you're in. That can get us into some dicey waters. And all of a sudden people think I prayed the prayer and now I'm good. What is prayer though? It's communicating with God. So tell him how you feel. Tell him what you think about your sin. Commit your life to him. Tell him you want to follow him. Recognize him as Lord. Submit your life to him. Pray. Begin talking to God. There's an element of truth there. What about coming to church? Yeah, you should come to church, but does going to church save you? No. So you need to be able to and you need to be able to respond and ready to respond with clear communication. You really haven't shared the gospel till you've gotten to the you of the gospel. And so in knowing it and practicing it, practice calling for a verdict or encouraging someone to turn away from their sin and turn to Jesus. I think Ray Comfort does such a good job of this in a lot of his videos. Living Waters is a wonderful ministry. And Ray will have these conversations with people. They could be on the beach or anywhere else. And he'll get them to a point where there really is nothing left to do but decide, will I respond to this guy, this Jesus, this message, or I kind of want to just get out of this conversation. And even Ray has such a way with words. When someone is not really interested, he'll say, well, hey, will you at least promise to consider what I've told you today? Would you give it some thought? Maybe later on, maybe tonight, would you consider what I've told you? Yeah, no, I definitely will. All right, have a good day. Sometimes people just want nothing to do with you, but you're still calling for some sort of action. What are you calling them to? Hey, if not right now, would you give this some thought later? Maybe just in the privacy of your home. I'm not crazy. I don't believe in this religion because my dad did or my mom did or because I need a coping mechanism. I really believe like Jesus is real and he changed my life. Would you give that some thought and consider how he would change yours if you would put your faith in him? All these things require thought. And here's my challenge. If someone says, well, that's kind of not really my MO, or I'm not really good at that, or I'm not a pastor like you. I mean, pastors talk a lot and they get a lot of practice at this stuff. I'm not gifted like this. Hold on. Just like things you're passionate about and you care about, the gospel is the same. You deliver those pieces of information, do you not? A restaurant you like, the menu, the food, the descriptions of the flavors. How about if you're in business and you know your vision, your mission, your values, you know why you do what you do? Another one, we know stats. We understand what's happening right now in football, whether that's American football or soccer, as we would call it, and some people would call that football. Our favorite songs. See, you start thinking about these things and you go, you know what? What I repeat is going to get retained. Repetition leads to retention. So practice delivering the gospel. Get it right. Practice what you would say. What would I say if that individual did say, I've needed to hear that. I was literally praying the other day and saying, God, if you're real, please send someone to help me find answers. You can't share what you don't know, and you can't help them take the step that God has for them if you are not prepared to guide them in that. So know the gospel and practice it. And that includes being ready to help someone take the next step. Number 2, foster genuine relationships. Even as a preacher, some of the most effective opportunities for sharing the gospel that I experience or seeing fruit in certain opportunities where I shared the gospel comes from genuine relationships with people. It's just bringing friendly conversation into someone's life. It's taking a genuine interest in them. It's seeing them as people. And I know that's normal and that's how it should be, but it's kind of a shocker sometimes how Christians can be some of the most awkward people. It's like we're reading from a script and every person is a box to check and like, I must evangelize you. And if I say these things and it doesn't work, you are not the elect. And if I say these things and it does work, you are the elect. Therefore, I will invite you to church, give you the track, you will be saved. you will be baptized, and I will move on to the next. Like we're like robots just going through all of the systems. And I'm talking about actually loving people, seeing them as made in the image of God, seeing gospel opportunities at times as an instantaneous moment of, I got to go in there and share this. Or, hey, I'm going to nurture this relationship. I know tomorrow's not promised, but I don't need to throw the gospel crusade at them in the 2 minutes I have, but I'm going to get coffee with them on Thursday or tomorrow, or I'm going to be calling them, or I know this is somebody I'm planning to see regularly. All those elements of thought are key to sharing the gospel effectively. This is all fostering genuine relationships. I mean, is there anything worse than the robotic salesperson who's pitching you something and it comes off like they're just trying to get through the moment and you're just another person and you know it's not sincere? If somebody's not sincere and they don't really care about me, to be honest, I'm just a cog in your wheel. I mean, what am I? I'm just another person. You'll say, oh, I shared the gospel with 14 people now this week. Next, like those people who go door to door, or the person who is zealous for winning theological arguments, but not necessarily for winning people. That's another way we need to think about fostering genuine relationships. Are you trying to beat people down and go, told you, gotcha, see, I was right, now what? No, we're not the Ben Shapiros of evangelism, where we're there to just pretzel someone up with intellectual rhetoric, and we can wax eloquent, and we're always right, and we're quick to the draw, doing this, saying that, boom, now what? See, told you, ha, mic drop. No. We are trying to win the person. The goal is souls. And one of the ways that Jesus modeled reaching people was forming genuine relationships with them, fellowshipping with them, being around them, not being influenced by them, but doing the influencing. And all of that, what was he doing? He was showing a sincere care for them. But he also did the next thing, and that's number 3. How to share the gospel. This one may seem a little out of order, but it's not. Maintain godly character. Number 3. And so number 1, again, let's review. Know the gospel and practice it. Number 2, foster genuine relationships. And then maintain godly character. If you think about this, it's not really out of order, is it? You don't think about it usually as, oh, well, this will help me share the gospel more because, well, how? It doesn't really order my words properly, or it doesn't help me recite the gospel track. It doesn't call for a verdict. Yeah, well, your life is the best sermon you'll ever preach. Your life is the calling card of gospel transformation. Your life is what they're looking at. The average non-Christian knows we're not perfect. They know we're not sinless. And they will take issue with the fact that we act perfect. They'll be the first to say, yeah, all you Christians are hypocrites. And we get all holier than thou. We talk religion, and meanwhile, we are living a certain way. You'll have Christians at work parties who are drunk like everybody else, drinking too much, or greedy and cutthroat to hit their financial goals, or they don't live out their faith authentically, except on Sunday. In all of that, friends, the world, your non-Christian neighbors, business associates, teammates, the people around you, they've got you and I by the neck when we are living like hypocrites. They're not wrong. Christians can be some of the biggest hypocrites around. And instead of being honest about our sin and modeling a need for the very gospel we preach, we often put up a front. And so, yes, have godly character. You should be an example of what the gospel does, but in your godly character, model the humility needed to say, listen, I'm a sinner too. Now, I don't make excuses for that, but Jesus has changed my life, and he's still changing me. Maybe sharing even the difference between a Christian and a non-Christian is not that one doesn't sin and the other does. No, we both sin, but I have a solution for my sin. And he's changing me from glory to glory, day after day. And there's this passage in the Bible, in Philippians 1:6, that says, he who began a good work in you will perfect it. It means he's going to keep on doing it until the day of Christ. So until Jesus returns. But friend, let me tell you, look, I'm not who I'm yet gonna be, okay? I got a lot of things that need to change, but I am not who I used to be. Jesus did that. The gospel changed me. When people hear that and they see it being modeled in our lives, now we're living that truth, that the greatest sermon you'll ever preach is with your life. So godly character. Number 4, speak truth consistently. How you share the gospel is helped by not being a one-hit wonder. Like every year during this time of year, you suddenly start sharing the gospel or speaking the truth. But the rest of the year, you're kind of silent. And your non-Christian friends and mine can tell that your church just said, hey, it's Easter coming up. Be sure to share the gospel with that one friend who is going to hell. Or, hey, be sure to invite that one person to Christmas this year. And then we spend the other 11 months kind of just doing our thing. Sharing the gospel is part of being a truth teller all the time, living the gospel out all the time, and speaking the truth in all other facets of our lives. It's not alarming to people when we share the way to heaven and how to be saved, when we are consistently known as being somebody who speaks the truth. I remember hearing a Muslim say how offended they were by their Christian friend because their Christian friend never tried to convert them. And it was hilarious to hear, because you think, you want to be converted? And the Muslim said, I have no intentions of being converted, but isn't one of the ways that I would know if you people really care about my soul, if you believe that you're right, is that you would tell me the truth? And I think of that illustration and go, I want to do a better job being authentic as a truth teller all the time. In every moment I can possibly bring truth to the table, I want to do that. That way, if the Lord opens eyes and he begins to soften hearts, my friends know, and the people who aren't believers around me know, at least Costi will shoot me straight. Is that what is said about you? Is that what is said about me? We're not in charge of whether or not people would be converted. We're not God. He's the one who does the saving. But our sincere devotion to speaking the truth will grow our reputation with those people. So when God chooses in his good time to transform that heart, where are they going? Right to your door, because they know you'll tell them the truth. Number 5, another how to share the gospel. Know your audience. One of the keys to effectively sharing the gospel is knowing who you're talking to. Again, in the same vein as before, not a boxed approach, but I want you to be thinking about this now more specifically. The core elements of the message. Who are you talking to? What is their particular issue? If you just broad brush or blanket everyone, and of course there's the basics of the gospel that should be broad brushed over every single person, but somebody may be a Roman Catholic. Okay, what do you need to know about Roman Catholicism in order to relate? Or what elements of the gospel are especially hitting their nervous system and they're going, that's uncomfortable. If you talk about propitiation or justification, if you're talking with a Mormon, if you're talking about somebody from Eastern Orthodox traditions, if you're talking about the gospel with a Hindu, or I already mentioned your Muslim friends, what are the things that they are constantly exposed to within their religious framework or non-religious framework, which brings up another category. Are you talking to an atheist? And so if you start right away with the assumption that they believe in God, well, you got to restart that conversation. You got to know your audience. That is incredibly important. Are you talking to children? Well, maybe you won't use the word propitiation, but you might use the word payment or atoned and go, have you ever thought about atonement? Have you ever heard that churchy word? Or maybe you've heard the word propitiation. You know, that's just a big $10 word to describe Jesus going to the cross. And what did he do? He paid the penalty for our sin. God punishes sin. God pours out his wrath on sin. And Jesus, instead of letting us go and have to pay that, because remember, Romans 6:23 says, for the wages of sin is death. You've ever heard of what a wage is? That's like your paycheck. Well, the paycheck you're going to get for sin is death. Well, Jesus came and said, I'll be the one who pays that. I'll be the propitiation or the atonement. I'll be the payment. That's really the word. Like if you go to the grocery store with your parents, or if you go to the store and you buy something, Jesus said, I'll pay it for them. And they can have life, and they can have salvation, and they can have God, my Father's mercy and his love. They can come to heaven and have a relationship. They can have my righteousness. I'll forgive all their sins. I'll pay for it. That's what that means. So that might be how you talk to a 7-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, someone in a different frame of mind and frame of life. Are you talking to teenagers? Are you talking to college students? Are you talking to the American church? Are you talking to the international church? I mentioned earlier when I said football, those who would consider football what an American would call soccer. In the same way, when you use certain language that's not necessarily in Scripture, but the concepts are, you want to be mindful. For some, the idea of sacrifice is very prevalent. I remember a friend of mine who went to the jungles of Papua New Guinea. His name is Brooks Buser. He's been on before. Some of you know Brooks. He reached the Yembe tribe. Well, Brooks used a very unique teaching style because he was reaching an unreached language group. They acted out the Bible. And so at one point, I have this great photo I've seen, and it's Brooks, this tall, blonde-haired. I mean, he's taller than me. He's 6'3", 6'4". He's got this blonde hair, blue eye. Brooks, if you end up hearing this, I'm sorry if I butchered your height. Maybe you're even taller than that. Brooks, just in my mind, is just a big guy. And he's got this knife, and he's going to sacrifice his son. And he's got his son, Bo, I think, if I remember the picture correctly, is there. And the people are just, I mean, they're in shock. Like, what? He would kill his own son? And he's acting out Abraham and Isaac. Now, that's not necessarily what I would do on a Sunday morning, nor what Brooks does when he preached at our church. He didn't bring up Bo and lay him out on the altar and preach the story of Abraham and Isaac. But for an audience that was a kind of animist and very in touch with the spirit realm as they saw it and believed that their dead ancestors and this and I mean, you're talking about people that have a framework. They had a worldview. The ability to see what he was describing brought it all to life. You've got to know your audience. This is why things like VBS are so good for kids. Engaging, being creative, and I think sometimes we maybe get a little uptight or legalistic. I'm not saying that this Sunday I'm coming in the pulpit, I don't know, with a chainsaw to explain how you've got to cut things out of your life, and I'm now going to become this wildly illustrative preacher. I think there's a time and a place. Maybe there is a context in which you bring a chainsaw, and it's with kids or something, or you're showing your kids something, and you bring in a gospel illustration. There are places for these things, and the church should utilize that appropriately. I mean, in the old days, we had the flannel graphs. I don't know if you remember that, but I remember as a kid being taught so many things by my Sunday school teachers in that way. Know your audience. Are you on a school campus? Are you in a youth group? Are you with a college group? Are you on the mission field with an unreached language group? Are you in a pulpit? Are you at a conference? Are you in a Bible study? Are you in your living room? Are you with an atheist? Are you with a Muslim? Know your audience. And that will protect you from coming off ignorant and insincere. Number 6, have a feel for the moment. I want to play off that last point here as we begin to land the plane. Where are you? When are you? How's the climate of the room? Have you considered your ability to field their response or their reaction? When you have a feel for the moment, this should be like if I'm on an airplane, if I'm in an elevator, if I'm walking down the hallway of a church, if I'm in a counseling room, have a feel for the moment. Sometimes I think Christians are famous for just like handing people tracts. Here's tracts. We sort of just like drive-by evangelism, and there's a great blessing to handing out tracts. But sometimes people just need you to stop and say, hey, listen, I'm a person of faith. I'm a Christian, and I believe in the power of prayer. Is there something I can just pray for you about? Or maybe you're at a restaurant and your server can't spend 10 minutes for your gospel presentation, but you can leave your name, leave your number. You can leave a card inviting them to church. You could say when you start the ordering process and you're ordering your drink to say, hey, while you're doing that, would you be thinking about something we can pray for you about? We're people of prayer. We're Christians, and we believe in the power of prayer. And we don't believe in accidents. We believe everything is ordained by God. And even right here, us being here and you being our server, we'd love to just pray for you at some point before we eat our meal. And that's not hyper spiritual. And some people get all weird about that. And like, oh, why are we trying to be all spiritual? Like maybe you're the one who's weird. As a Christian, going about your business, doing whatever you want, living it up for yourself, feeling real spiritual because you punch the clock on Sunday. But then in all of these other contexts, it's like, leave me alone. I'm not, mind your own business and I'll mind mine. You are here as salt and light. Jesus never says, I'm calling you to become salt and light. He says you are. So be salty and be light in dark places. I've seen more incredible moments. I've seen tears from servers. I have seen people on airplanes and seats next to me or next to friends of mine experience life change because you just acted normal and knew the moment. And by normal, I mean a Christian, an on-mission, gospel-ready Christian. Know the moment. Have a feel. Are you opening up a deep topic, but you've only got like 2 minutes? Or are you at an hour and a half lunch and you can get deep with somebody? Maybe it's not wise to start a war at Thanksgiving. Know the moment. Have a feel for the moment. But maybe there's some ways that you could bring faith into that conversation. All in all, sharing the gospel includes having a feel for the moment. Not everyone needs a sermon. Sometimes they do. Not everybody needs a spirited debate about sovereignty and free will, but sometimes they do. Not everyone needs you to go straight to the point on heaven and hell, but sometimes they do. Okay, last two. Be a great question asker. Be a great question asker. Learn to ask people questions. Again, I brought up Ray Comfort. He's so good at this. Practice your own versions at work if you're taking an interest in how people are doing. Whether they're sad, moody, happy, going through trials. Get in there with some questions. Don't be all business. Be on mission. You are a person who needs to be a great question asker. Sometimes when I'm on airplanes, I'll say to somebody, hey, so where are you from? You heading home? You heading out? Work? Personal? And I'll just get them talking. Somebody did that to me recently, and we ended up in a great conversation. All right. So you're married, you have kids, you have grandkids. There's all these questions you can ask, getting to know a bit more of their story. And then maybe if I were asked those questions, I might, with certain individuals, I did this recently. I said, yeah, I'm traveling in. Whenever I travel, I miss my wife and my kids so much. Family's so precious, but not everyone sees it that way these days. You know what I mean? And it was an older woman. She was a grandmother, and she was like, "Oh, tell me about it." I mean, the people these days, and I got her going because I talked about the importance of old values, traditional values, and she goes, "People are so disconnected. They're staring at their phones, and next thing you know, and then politics got brought up, and then more topics, and before I knew it, we are into conservatism, family values, God, and I've got my avenue, all because I knew with her in particular, because of some of the initial things that she had asked me, that this might be a great opportunity to bring up old school values. But I've been on airplanes before. One woman, I'll never forget this. I had my hands on the armrest. I was in the middle, just trying to stay comfortable. I ended up in a middle seat, and she took her elbow and she elbowed my arm off the armrest. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. And I tried to move it back to just get a different spot. And she was like, get off my armrest and don't touch me. And I was like, okay. And over time, throughout that flight, I tried a couple of times. So are you on a work trip? And she was like, don't talk to me. I was like, okay. So sometimes being a good question asker, that doesn't always work. And you got to leave people alone. But maybe you can ask somebody questions that can get them talking, but sometimes people don't want it. They're not having it. Read a good book, mind your business. But in the end, you've got to be thinking, how can I get this person talking? And if they engage, am I ready to take that to the next level? An opportunity to share the gospel many times is preceded by simply asking somebody genuine questions. And that will lead to, number 8, invite them to church. Not everyone feels confident, but that shouldn't be a barrier to your invitation to come and see what God has done. Let's say you're going, okay, Costi, some of the things you've said are helpful. I can use them. Some of them, I am not that good in conversation. I'm not quick on my feet, or I wouldn't know how to call for a verdict and get them to that end point. Okay, great. Well, I did mention earlier, it's not just about drive-by evangelism and like, come to church, come to church, come to church, and you never share the gospel. But listen, if you've got a faithful preacher in your church, you got a pastor that will do the job that we need our pastors to do, then the come and see invitation is absolutely a great way to share the gospel. Why? Maybe you yourself didn't say, repent and believe, but you started a sincere conversation, you built a bridge, and now you invited them to a place where they're going to see what God is doing. And unbelievers come into our midst in the church, and the service isn't, quote unquote, for them, like it's designed to make them feel really comfortable and it's all worldly. And like, yeah, these people are just like me. No, the church is the manifold wisdom of God on display. They enter in, and because you invited them, they suddenly say, wow, I haven't felt this way ever before. There's something going on here. Thank you for inviting me. And now you take them to lunch and you take the baton and you keep it going. Another aspect of this, as far as invite them to church, is one of the reasons we do this as a ministry is to provide you as believers with gospel resources you can share with people. One of the main reasons I write books is to equip Christians. I want to serve and strengthen Christians, but also give Christians resources that they can hand new believers or an unbeliever. And you can buy them a devotional. You could tell them why. I mean, be normal about it and say, hey, would you be willing to come to church with me? Nothing weird, nothing crazy, but it's really helped me to hear more about God, to study the Bible, just to be around some people who are going somewhere with a purpose. I'd love for you to join me. I'll come pick you up, offer to give them a ride, and pray that God would soften their heart and work through your invitation. One of the reasons we're inviting Vodi Bakum out, we're doing a Phoenix regional here For the Gospel. It's called Not of This World. It's on February 1st. And we're starting to do certain events is not only to support the church with sound doctrine, but to open up doors for people to invite a friend to an event. They may be conservative, but they don't yet have Christ. And if you are conservative and America starts going the direction we want it to, or your context does, praise God, but conservatism doesn't save. Christ is the one who saves. And so we do these things to open up opportunities to not only strengthen and equip believers, but to give believers an opportunity to invite somebody who can come into contact with the gospel. All of these, all 8, can be great places for you to start, assuming, though, that you know the gospel and you practice the gospel. So do not take this list and divorce it from episode 1. You got to know the gospel. But above all else, remember to pray. Prayer is your best tool, because through prayer, God can soften hearts, God can equip and strengthen you and give you confidence and clarity and wisdom, and He can and will draw people to Himself. All right, that's our series on the gospel. 4 weeks, 4 episodes. It's been strengthening for a number of you. I know that you've shared that with us. If you'd love to drop a comment or leave a review or shoot us a DM and let us know how this series has helped you, we'd be encouraged to know how these resources are being used by God in your life. And wait until you listen next week to the beginning of a series we're going to introduce. We're going 4 weeks on the subject of worship, and by worship, I mean music. I've got my guests from Sovereign Grace Music, Bob Coughlin, Devin Coughlin, his son, and David Zimmer, my dear friend and brother. These 3 men were willing to sit down. I went over to the Sovereign Grace studios in Louisville, Kentucky, and we sat down together. It's going to be 4 episodes. Episode 1 is going to be the expression in our worship. Number 2, the theology in our worship. Number 3, the style in our worship. And number 4, the leaders of our worship. We're talking about all things that pertain to music, worship, the gathering of the church, expression, style, theology, the leadership of the church, all that. You are not going to want to miss it. This is going to be formative for you, for your church. If you're a pastor, I think this will be a resource you can give to your music team, your music director, your deacon of music, whoever, but it's going to be for all of us. And so don't miss that. Thanks as always for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for sharing and supporting. If you want to come out to Phoenix for one of our events, the next one is February 1st. It's going to be an all-day Saturday event with Vodi Bakum and myself. It's called Not of This World. Perfect post-election if you're in the U.S. opportunity to consider the ways that we need to live for Christ in today's culture. And that, number one, involves not being like this world, even though we're in this world. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe here on YouTube. And to learn more about our ministry or partner with us as a monthly gospel patron, go to forthegospel.org. I'll be back next Monday with another episode and that worship series, Keep on Living for the Gospel.